Welcome to the Scuffed Patch Notes Rundown by Frodan, brought to you by some of the graphics team at TFT Academy and Riot. Thank you, Riot, for sending us the patch notes. Just as a disclaimer, again, if this is your first time watching it, I don't actually work at Riot. This is just a copy of patch notes they sent out the night before, like 16 hours before they officially posted it. And so this is just me formatting it in a way. Actually, in fact, I believe the reason why it's okay for them to do this way is because literally the patch notes should be out on the website right now. So if you don't even want to watch this, you can go straight to teamfighttactics.com, news, and the patch notes, I believe. Oh, they're not out. Okay, well, I mean, you snooze, you lose. All right, so the first thing that I want to talk about is, let's talk about the patch, right? Mortdog, whenever we did this rundown, talk about like what the patch was. And I feel like one thing I want to add is like how the patch actually developed so people understand how we got here. Some people probably didn't play a lot of the patch. Maybe that you didn't like it, or maybe you were traveling, busy, AFK, whatever. But this is kind of how the patch ended up developing. I'm covering part of it the screen, so maybe I'll move my cam for a sec here. But basically, week one of the patch was like heavily dominated by Yuumi and Ashe. I think most people said like they were stat checking everything. The two S tier lines that everyone was playing was like Yuumi and Ashe. And Colossal Udyr was like a big thing that people complained about a lot. But then we started seeing a lot of new reroll lines open up, right? I think one of the big ones was the new way to play crew. We played around Jhin. We stopped playing around Shen. We stopped looking for Ziggs. We played around Jhin and played around Protector Snipers. That was like a pretty big reroll line that came out of China. And then fan service Xayah was being experimented. There's like some niche rerolls like that and some 3-cost like Kog'Maw and Viego. But then we realized that they were kind of situational. We continued to start to find more artifact optimization. So we found like Innervating Locket was really insanely good on Garen if you ever played into the Yuumi line. Because Jhin was becoming a much more popular backline carry. Fishbone's Ashe, Fishbone's Kai'Sa, Fishbone's Jhin. Like that's all the different stuff around artifacts. So that's another thing that people were starting to jam. And then we started seeing a lot of Star Guardians, almost too much Star Guardians. Like too many people were playing Star Guardians to the point where it felt like it was actually being a bad line. But people started optimizing around whether or not you had like an AD opener or like an AP opener. And this was all leading into the first weekend of the event, which we had the pro circuit. And this was mostly the meta. Then week 2, we started actually realizing that Yuumi and Ashe were a lot less stable. Like, yes, Yuumi and Ashe were really stable on 1-stars. But Mentor Rise, if you socialite stuff, and we socialited everything, end up being way too stable on 1-star. And right now, if you were to play on this patch, almost every top player who's climbing seriously plays Mentor in somewhere between 40 to 60% of their games, minimum. There's some people who literally play it like 80% plus. They're playing it like almost every game because it is so stable. And yes, you probably will take some like 5th and 6th, but like you're not going to really finish in the bottom if you hit Rise. But there's also some crazy screenshots where I see.
Mortdogged again.
Let me mute my notifications. Thanks so much, Ico's Landing. Is that you might see like people play too much Rise, but that's currently what's going on. But of course, that also doesn't matter because Weijin Iverson also showed us how to optimize around Varus Fast 9. If you guys missed it, Weijin actually did an insane climb this past patch where he climbed 800 LP in 3 days, averaging in the ones, and I'm not even exaggerating. It's like a 1.9 over like 21 games, and a big part of that was his Varus Fast 9, which is why it takes number 1. Because I think most people understand, yes, all these comps can be good, but Varus is the definitive late game composition at the very end. So let's talk about this patch then. So what's going to be changing this patch? First of all, this patch is unbelievably massive. It's huge. It's a 32-slide presentation show. It took me 3.5 hours to make yesterday. So I made a table of contents for this patch to help you get a preview of what's to come because it is that big. So the first thing is that there are role changes coming this patch. Just as a summary of it, Assassin Champion is no longer going to be a role. That doesn't mean Assassin effects are not going to be in the game. It just means the role, right? We're talking about when you look at the champion on the right side screen, is it a magic fighter? Is it a marksman? Is it a tank? There's no such thing as an assassin anymore. They're now called fighters. Everyone who's a melee carry is just a fighter. And they're not going to get Omnivamp. They're instead going to get attack speed. And that's going to be really important because you're going to see a list of nerfs on people's attack speed that's going to be crazy. You're going to be like, why are they doing that? Because of the role changes. Second big section is that there's going to be a lot of changes to items. both in terms of just occurrence. So artifacts they've identified in the patch notes. They actually typed a bunch of, like, if you read the patch notes, I'm summarizing a lot of what they're saying. But they basically said artifacts are too common and they're too strong. So there's going to be large nerfs and straight up removal of instances that you can get artifacts. So they're going to be less common, which is thumbs up, I think, for a lot of people. And they're also going to rework items as well, which we'll talk about in a little bit. The third big section will be just the general buffs and nerfs to traits and units. The comment that they added with this was combat pacing is too high, meaning that basically it's too explosive and either it ends too quickly or it stalls out too hard and just does massive damage. So their words is that it's going to be a heavy nerf patch. I read through the patch notes. I don't know if I agree with the sentiment that it's a nerf heavy patch. I think that there's a lot of buffs. So if people think, oh, nerfs are lame, I don't know if I necessarily agree with how they wrote that, but at least that's the goal. The goal is to have a nerf heavy patch and buff the things that are doing not as good. We'll see. And I'll point to a couple of these buffs later on. They're also going to rework Luchador again. If you guys have watched Mortdog's stream, he was talking about how Luchador is not his favorite trait. A lot of people have compared it to Oxforce from Monsters Attack, which was notoriously one of the most toxic designs. If you ever have gone up against a single Gnar in Stage 2 and Gnar with a Rage Blade, I'm not even talking about Gnar 2, I'm talking about Gnar 1 with a Rage Blade, sometimes with Luchador, just resets and gets the last couple attacks, activates whatever, like Kahuna Huna or something, and then just wipes you because of the reset. They're actually changing that. They're actually changing some of the Luchador. We'll tell you about that in a little bit. They also did a big pass on prismatic orbs. The biggest summary is, and again, I'm covering part of it, so I'm sorry. And I'm going to release this slideshow for the public if you guys want, but they're doing a massive overhaul of the drop content, and now every player is going to get the same prismatic orb. Finally, power-ups. There's a big balance wave of power-ups. A lot of buffs to power-ups, which is why I don't think this is a nerf-heavy patch. I think they buffed something like 80%. Like 80% of the power-ups listed are buffed, something like that. And there's also new power-ups as well. And the reason why power-ups are really relevant, and the reason I think it's important to bring up, is because the number one reason why Mentor Rise end up being really good is because we discovered socialite, tailoring, and interactions. And if you look at a lot of what's going on in the tier list, it's because they're largely pushed by the power-ups. We found out about Colossal Udyr. That is what pushed Ashe to the top. And with how strong is Ashe really if you couldn't even get Colossal Udyr? Not really, right? She's okay, I guess. Maybe not even that good. Maybe she'd be bad. So I think this is where I think I call into question some of the commentary about it. But I mean, we'll see. You guys can be the judge for yourself. Okay, so we have systems. We start off with systems. This is actually a pretty big deal if you care about fight variants. They're changing champion targeting as one of their systems changes for this patch, which is they're going to make sure that tanks are going to be taking aggro. And this is because they're changing assassin role, right? The assassin role is that they just basically shouldn't get targeted ever. But with fighters, it's a little bit more ambiguous because I think they're trying to make sure that champion roles, like the tanks are going to draw aggro. So the summary is, at combat start, ranged champions will now properly respect the tank targeting tiebreakers. Ranged champions will always target before melee champions move. That wasn't the case before. So it should stop ranged champions from targeting a wrapping fighter, wrapping meaning units on the far left or far right, trying to get to the back line against the solo front line. They should be protected by the adjacent tank. So if you put like a Leona next to a Yone, like in this picture, it should target the Leona every time now. It should. Now, that's because before the reason why it wouldn't was because in the fight would start and Yone could walk up and then Caitlyn would target, but now it should theoretically target this way. Now, again, they've tried to do this in the past, and there might be edge cases where it's not working as intended, or maybe it doesn't even work at all, but at least that's what is written in the patch notes. Second wave of system changes, champion roles. So we talked about this before, but the assassin tag is leaving. It might come back in the future. And this only affects 3 champions, Katarina, Yasuo, and Akali. They're all considered fighters now. And they no longer game Omnivamp. And the reason why this is a really big deal is because I don't know if you guys have tried building things like Bloodthirster and Hand of Justice this set, but generally speaking, they're not very good. Omnivamp items on melee champions are considered to be quite suboptimal because you basically get 20% Omnivamp when it matters to get these champions online, and you don't really need to have that anymore. So instead, you can build Edge of Night and Quicksilver and a Striker's Flail or a Giant Slayer. And how many times have you seen people say, like, I don't understand, why don't you need healing on your champion? Shouldn't you be building healing if you're watching better players, you're looking at guides? You don't need to, right? Like, you know, for example, I could pull up the tier list and talk about Darius. Darius is like, do you even need Omnivamp? No, you can just go straight damage. Infinity Edge, Flail, and Stairs Gauge. Or you can go Edge of Night, or you can go Titans. You don't need healing at all, right? And that's because you have built-in Omnivamp. And they don't like that. I don't like that because that makes it feel like some items are just unplayable or like pretty bad. Instead, they're going to rework it to give attack speed based on the stage. And it's going to be 5, 10, 20, 30, and 30. I guess it's like just going to be 30% on stage 6. I'm not sure why they wrote that. And hopefully this offsets some of the bad feeling with itemization. So maybe BT comes back in the meta. Maybe Hodge is a better slam now. And maybe mandatory. Or maybe you still double down and you play a glass cannon. Or maybe you pick an Omnivamp power-up, right? This should theoretically change how you're itemizing. Isn't this a full nerf to Assassins? Well, Assassins no longer exist. So it's actually like not exactly a true nerf. And then also to compensate for the amount of attack speed being given, they nerfed a bunch of people's attack speed. So Katarina, Darius, Yasuo, Akali, Volibear, Braum, Lisa, and Yone. This is what you guys saw in PB notes. Some of you guys saw this earlier. Like, why are they nerfing Volibear? Why are they nerfing Akali? Like, they're not great. They're not like the dominant forces right now. It's because of this adjustment change. But they're getting a lot of attack speed later in the game. And attack speed, just to give you guys a frame of reference, attack speed is usually one of the single most important stats that you can buff a champion with, because attack speed is directly related to how fast they cast with their mana. So, and that's obviously the way it triggers a lot of other things as well. So don't sleep on this. If you think, okay, whatever, it's like a 5% attack speed, but they're nerfing Yasmin from 0.9 to 0.75, that doesn't even sound like big numbers. It is. These attack speed, because the way combat flows largely determines by who's able to cast their abilities, and attack speed directly relates to that. Okay, system number 3. Prismatic orbs now have a wider spectrum of possible values, and every player gets the same prismatic orb output. So let's go ahead and just walk down what's the possible list. And the reason why they redid this is because you might notice there's no longer artifacts on the list, or rather, there's no longer the opportunity to get 2 artifact anvils, right? Mortdog actually personally said that he actually reworked this. He also introduced some troll options. Let me see. Let me pull this up real quick. Well, I don't see it online, but basically he said that he like reworked this himself, and this was one of his big projects. You can get 30 gold, and it's a big range, right? On average, you should be getting a prismatic augment worth of stuff. So 30 gold, 3 components, belts for forgers, you know, duplicators, which could be pretty swingy. We'll see. But then some games, it can get really crazy, right? You can get like 40 gold and 20 rerolls, which is a crazy amount of gold. That's a crazy amount of gold, especially if you're like fast nining, right? 5%, 40 gold, 20 rerolls. All of a sudden, everyone goes fast 9 and rolls their 5 cost. It might be entirely possible. The 1%, they didn't actually say what it is. So the thing in parentheses is my commentary, because I don't know what it is, but they drop some hints as to what it could be, because this is me interpreting it. They wrote like, you might need some mittens for this reward or something like that. And I'm like, okay, maybe it's mittens. A fishy reward? Okay, maybe it's fish bones. I have no clue. This 1% stuff is just my guess. Also, just as a reference, it's written right here, the chances of prismatic orb dropping is in 4% of your games. If you're a player that hates this kind of variance and hates injection of resources and rolls your eyes whenever it happens, it's only going to happen in 4% of your games. It's actually less than that. It's like 3.x, but it's about 4%. The fishy's a dead fish. It could be. It could be. I have no clue. The last of the system rewards is reducing artifact appearances. So artifact anvils will not drop from gold orbs at all anymore. It's 0%. If that happens off a gold orb, that is a bug. Please report that. Instead, you're going to get more. You're more likely to get a champion dupe, or you're more likely to get 2 5 costs. So that's a gold orb reward. And then Opening encounters, lose subscription will no longer give an artifact off of this opening round, right? Like you can get a reward where at the beginning of the game, you get an artifact, or maybe stage 3, stage 4, whatever. At any time, you can get an artifact anvil drop. That's not possible anymore. Instead, you're going to get one completed item anvil in a salvager. And they also decided to nerf PvE as well. Stage 2-7 Krugs has been nerfed to 95. And they also are nerfing Crab Rave. And the reason why they're nerfing this is because they nerfed a lot of the champions' attack speed. So if you're playing stage 2-7, I believe one thing they may have found out was that if you're playing like a loose streak strategy and you field some of these units that got nerfed from attack speed, let's say you're playing Katarina and Darius, you actually might lose because you don't have Omnivamp either. So I think they're I think they nerfed Krugs because they're worried that you guys might lose to Krugs by accident a couple times because they actually nerfed some of the champions at their base level. And also Crab Rave was probably just doing too much damage. Let's be real. Crab Rave was kind of OP. It's actually kind of crazy. What is a salvager? A salvager is you use this. It's a consumable that you use on a completed item. You have to use it on like a Bloodthirster, a Warmogs, a Bramble Vest, and it breaks it apart into two components that made it. So it's like a salvage bin augment, but it's a one-time use. So if you accidentally made an Edge of Night, or maybe you drop something crazy and like you want to play around the Rise now, but your tier is committed elsewhere, you can salvage it. So those are the system changes. Let's talk about the trait changes. There's 3 main slides about traits. The first is that they're buffing Crystal Gambit again. But they're nerfing the stage 4 multiplier. So basically, the opener of Crystal Gambit is now going to be even better. And I actually think this was a buff that's not necessary. I think Crystal Gambit is actually totally fine as an opener. But now, if you get dropped like a Vi and a Swain and a Janna, maybe you don't just sell like the Janna and Vi immediately because you think you need to hold the other things. You can consider playing around Crystal Gambit. Also, this is a direct buff to Loose Streak because Loose Streak in general has not felt very good a lot of this set. I think in general, Loose Streak has only been good into some of the S tier lines. So they're buffing Crystal Gambit. Again, I don't think it's entirely necessary. I think Crystal Gambit is actually still playable early. In fact, I believe like I played it 4 or 5 times this patch, and I don't think I bought for a single time. Actually, no, sorry. I took one really bad 8th, but that was because I went for it all. But for the most part, I think it's definitely viable. It might be something for like lower elo players because they were struggling to get any Crystal Gambit value. Because most of the time you were cashing out. You were cashing out anyways, like at a pretty reasonable number, like 250. But this should help you get to 250 pretty consistently. The stage 4 multiplier is basically like a nerf to the true Fast 9 Varus. Like Fast 9 Varus plays 3 Crystal Gambit. And so what ends up happening in this situation is they find 1 Zyra, 1 Swain, 1 Janna, and they like trade wins, and they hope that the cash out will be good enough to help them like get a little bit extra resources, and this will just like slow them down a little bit more. They're buffing 6 heavyweight. I don't think 6 heavyweight has really been a good vertical to play for. The only times we've seen heavyweight at all was to play around reroll, Jace, and Darius, and that is a very, very niche line. They're also buffing Poppy, and that's going to be something else talked about later. Actually, to be more precise, they're actually reworking or restructuring Poppy a little bit. They're going to give her scaling off of her shield, and that directly correlates to her HP, which is good for heavyweight theoretically. So maybe 6 heavyweight and you cap with Poppy and some other unit is going to be more desirable next patch. We'll see. But either way, this has been a pretty underperforming trade, which makes a lot of sense. Luchador is getting reworked again. It no longer grants immunity and untargetability before jumping, which is a really big deal. But it means that you won't drop the aggro. What ended up happening with Luchador was that Luchador was basically causing a lot of problems with like bugging out. Sometimes it was visually bugging, like it would jump to the ceiling and then somehow you'd be like shooting it. And then there's also like the fact that like if you had Mundo as your tank, it would drop aggro and then they would start targeting your backline. So it was like weird because sometimes, let's say you're playing against like the Rise. If the Rise targeted your Braum or your Mundo, they would jump out of the way and then the Rise would like switch his beam and kill your corner unit, and it would just feel really bad. So that kind of dynamic has been really problematic. And so they're trying to actually change that. But because that's just like a straight up nerf to a lot of like certain luchador interactions, like it's like very bad for like Volibear, for example. They're rebuffing the max HP health, and these values are really high. In fact, last patch they nerfed this from 2050 to 1535. Now they buff, so this is actually higher. 2 luchador is actually higher than it was in the previous patch before they nerfed it. But then they also said that they also added a text: champions will heal before damage to allow them to survive if they would out heal the damage. Champions no longer run backwards before leaping. So just keep that in mind. There's going to be a lot of changes to luchador. Okay, trace number 2, Mighty Mech. They're buffing 7 Mighty Mech. This line in general has not been performing that well. I would say that it's pretty niche. I actually think that this line is slightly underrated because most people have not discovered that Socialite is actually playable. But Karma herself is not very impactful. So 7 Mighty Mech has not seen that much play and also requires you to hit Yone. This should theoretically make things like the I'll be the legs, I'll be the arms type of Mech Prismatic easier to also hit. So it's buff there. But I don't think anyone here is like thinking 7 Mech is OP. So I think this is probably fine. They're nerfing Prodigy team-wide mana regen. This is not a nerf to the Prodigy buff itself for the Prodigies. But when you played Prodigy, there was 2 numbers. One was how much mana regen the Prodigies get and how much mana regen the rest of the team gets. They're nerfing the rest of that. And now it's just 1 mana regen across the entirety of the team. So you're not going to get extra 1 or 2 mana regen, which is a big deal, right? Because that helps buff the whole team. You're talking about like, 4 to 5 other units getting extra mana regen, which is a pretty big deal. So this is one of 2 really big nerfs to Prodigies, and that is probably going to affect the Yuumi BA comp a lot. It's probably going to force Yuumi comps to do something else. Wraith getting a pretty big buff. The Shadow Cadence is now going to activate every 4 seconds. I'm pretty sure a lot of you guys don't even know what Wraith does. I can't even explain it to you very eloquently. So the best summary I can give is that every 4 seconds, it's going to deal some damage and heal your units instead of 5. And that actually is kind of a big deal, right? For fight pacing. 6 Wraith is already kind of sneaky good. But the problem with 6 Wraith is you just need Varus. So it's like, is 6 Wraith good or is Varus good? And the answer is like yes to both. But now this might make some things really good. Like I think the Zac Hero augment, for example, is already very solid, especially if you get it off protagonist. It's like one of the best prismatic starts in the game. Now this might make one of those things where like perfect form Zac is insanely strong because he's just going to heal way more and he's going to deal way more damage. So it's possible that this is a massive, massive buff, but also it's entirely possible that Wraith still sucks. Like Wraith is not something you play around early. So we'll see. They also did buff Malzahar, but that's coming up in a little bit. All right, Protector, shield them out. They're nerfing Protectors. Protectors just overperforming, especially on some of these reroll comps. Really strong if you ever got it online with the Protector Sniper, around Kog'Maw, around Fan Service Xayah. Also, one of the best splashes for a 2 trait defensively in the game because it just gave you durability. So just a little bit too good. There's also a lot of things that synergize with Protectors as well, like Keepers as an augment or different power-ups like Caretakers. So Protector getting a pretty sizable nerf, about like a little bit less than 10%. And then the last one is a big adjustment. Adjustment is the word to Star Guardians. So basically, one of the complaints about Star Guardians is that they're not flexible because the Star Guardian bonus is so profoundly strong. And important that it just always incentivizes you to just add another Star Guardian. Like if you want to play more around Xayah and Ahri, just put more Star Guardians in, right? So what they're doing is they're nerfing the Star Guardian bonuses by about 20%, 10 to 20% somewhere, and then they're going to compensate by buffing the base bonuses by 10 to 20% across whatever the numbers are. It's not an exact number because some of them are just relative because 5 to 6 AP for Syndra versus the 20% Rel Shield. But it's all different. The only thing that's notable is that Ahri has not changed because they don't want the mana to get out of control. They also buffed Ahri's bonuses last patch, so not that big of a deal. But this is actually really, really hard to understand what this means. Does this mean that tiny team, there's an augment that says like your Star Guardian bonuses are amplified even more, but you only can play 3? Does that make that augment really good? Does this mean that maybe you have more flex spots? Like maybe if you want to play Ari, or maybe you want to play Ari, Rel, Swain reroll and play around sorcerers, this is better. Well, I guess maybe not Ari. But yeah, either way, there's theoretically, this should make Star Guardians a little bit less attached to their vertical and a little bit more dynamic with how you build the team, but we'll see. I have a sneaking suspicion this might not change very much for the Star Guardian line itself, but there might be some reroll lines that pop up, which we'll talk about in a little bit. There's actually a really exciting change for Xayah coming up later this patch notes. So that's all the traits and systems. Let's move on to champions. So there's only two changes to one cost. Malphite and Sivir. Malphite is too good of a tank, specifically in the Protector Sniper comp. Hitting Malphite 3 is far, far, far more important than Sivir. I don't know if you guys have ever gotten worth the weight Malphite versus worth the weight Sivir, or build the bud Malphite versus build the bud Sivir. Those are the things that give you extra 1 cost or the guaranteed 3-star. It is embarrassing, the gap between Malphite and Sivir in terms of the importance of that composition. Sivir is horrendous, but they are buffing her pretty significantly. This is 2 massive buffs on paper, giving her 5 more AD, which affects everything, her auto attacks and her ability, and having her cast even quicker. That being said, most sentiment across the board is that this shouldn't be that huge, as in that this in tandem with the Malphite nerfs shouldn't make it like, if anything, it might still be relatively similar. In fact, it might actually be worse because the whole point of this composition was Malphite to stall for the snipers. It's not like snipers lack damage. It was actually the front line. The true win condition of this composition for Malphite snipers was Malphite 3 early and then Cassante 2. Whether or not you hit Gen 3 was kind of important, but not as important as securing the front line. So this is a really, really big nerf to Malphite. Really, really big. And so we'll see what happens to that composition. This is not just a straight like balance thrash though. They did actually buff crew in a couple of other ways. So if you're like, well, this sucks because crew's my favorite comp, they actually have a couple of more crew buffs coming in. Ziggs is actually one of the units that they're buffing, so coming up soon. 2-cost champions. They're nerfing Kai'Sa. Kai'Sa just scales too fast, so they're reducing her spell damage a little bit at the base level so that you need to kill a little bit more. This probably just makes Loose Streak Kai'Sa hard to pull off. It might look really, really minuscule, but you have to remember that Kai'Sa is a scaling champion, so it starts off low and it snowballs. So it's one of those things where a slight nerf to Kai'Sa won't. It just means that you just can't like open for it. Basically, what's happening right now is that a lot of players are just like losing all stage 2 and not getting a single stack on Kai'Sa. There's like, it's fine. Maybe I get 1 or 2. You might have to actually try. Your spot's going to be worse for it if you're not getting any kills at all. Janna is getting a pretty big nerf. This is one of the biggest nerfs or one of the biggest raw buffs in the patch to the champion. Janna is not really seen as a primary carry. She's actually seen as a tertiary carry. The way you usually play a lot of comps with Janna is that you reroll for like the primary carry, a secondary carry, and then if you have items and you somehow have Janna 3, you could put items on Janna. And she's not really seen as like a very viable threat. At the beginning of the set in PB, she actually did have a reroll comp that was really strong with Protector Strategist. But now with buffs to Janna, and you'll see it next page, but buffs to Ziggs, maybe strategists have a reroll line now. We'll see. We don't know exactly, but Janna also, by the way, has some sneakily good power-ups available to her, like Efficient, which is really, really good with a Protector comp. But they did also nerf, you have to remember, they did also nerf 6 Protectors here. So they did. It's not like Janna just got straight buffs across the board. Vi is getting a little bit of a buff. If you guys looked at the stats, you checked out the podcast with me and Disso, we've talked about it. Vi is the worst unit in the game AVP-wise. Crystal Gambit struggling. Juggernauts are not exactly the most common front line. So they're just buffing Vi to make her a little bit stronger. What's actually really funny is that they actually buffed the Crystal Gambit gem on loss cash out, but they buffed Janna and Vi. So in some ways, be very careful. They did buff Janna and Vi. You might accidentally win with Crystal Gambit early because they buffed those units. All right, Malzahar for 3 costs. Malzahar is getting buffed. So this might look like a small buff. Remember, he's a prodigy, so he gets a lot of mana. So Malzahar getting and he's one of those things that he snowballs, right? The more he's able to cast, the more he's spreading his little virus thing. So Malzahar is getting buffed. And this is one of the things about the Prodigy line. The Prodigies are not getting straight nerfed across the board. They're actually getting a couple of small buffs, and this is one of them. They also buff Wraith. So maybe it's one of those things where Malzahar is even detached from Prodigy a little bit and more emphasized on Wraith. Something to keep an eye out. But Malzahar is largely seen as a utility unit, and rolling for Malzahar 3 is bait in the Prodigy line because you'd rather just push levels and get to 5 Prodigy ASAP because the trait is more important than the power. So buffing the 3 cost here is good. Senna gets a green novel. We talk about sometimes the green sentences are important, but she has a full-on paragraph. So the core gameplay logic of Senna's ability is now going to stop. It's going to react quicker if she's shooting nothing. Right now, the way Senna's beam works is that she shoots her ability, and that ability just keeps finishing and beaming until she runs out of, I guess, juice. And then if she's not targeting anything, she gets some mana back. But the problem is, it's not about the mana refund. It's the fact that she takes a long time to stop casting if nothing is there. Now she's going to react quicker and move faster after the spell ends because she basically takes a really long time to reload. But because this is such a big deal with maybe her effective DPS, they're nerfing her damage. So this is one of those things where if you saw the PvE notes ahead of time, because you're looking at some websites from the data mining, it might look like they nerf Senna, even though she's not that strong of a champion. You might be thinking, oh, wait, isn't she actually core to the Mentor Rise line? Not really. The Mentor Rise line is actually turned into Rise, and you actually don't really prioritize Senna at all. Like, you give her some items if you hit her early and you have AD items, but you're not really playing around Senna anymore. Now it's like one of those things where maybe you do play around Senna, and the Senna Yasuo or the Senna reroll. Maybe you play Senna in mech. Maybe you just like have Senna as one of the mech carries alongside Karma. Maybe that ends up being something to think about. The other 3 costs, they over nerf Smolder. They changed the monster EXP last patch to be faster. Smolder was already a decent performing champion. They didn't want him to be OP, so they nerfed Smolder preemptively. That was unnecessary, so they're rebuffing him. It's basically similar to what they had last patch. So Smolder's back, and maybe he'll be a more viable carry because right now he's not very good. They're nerfing the healing on Udyr, and this is a direct nerf to Colossal Udyr because part of what made him so oppressive was the healing aspect of things. Also, I guess it impacts a little bit of the 4 mentor comp, but no one's really primary taking Udyr in that line. This is purely just an aim at the Ashe line, but they're not nerfing Ashe, I believe. And they're buffing Ziggs. Ziggs getting a fat 3-star buff. Holy cow. This guy's getting a straight like 90 damage buff base, which is crazy. So we talked about like Malphite getting nerfed, right? Malphite getting kind of taken down a couple notches, but guess what? It might be the era of Ziggs. And also, I said they're buffing Janna, right? So if you hit Janna 3, Ziggs 3, maybe we shouldn't sell Ziggs every single time we get him out of an orb now. I mean, maybe we do, maybe don't, but he's definitely not useless if you 3-star him. I mean, that's a lot of numbers. That's a lot of numbers. Over to 4 costs. Cassante has been one of the most powerful 4 costs for the entirety of the set. In fact, I think Cassante is probably overdue for a nerf. He is also so powerful and ubiquitous that you could justify his slotting him into anything. He's actually one of the few threats in the game. Threat from like set 8 where it didn't have any traits. Cassante's traits are nice, but they don't matter that much. You can just justify putting him in anything. And he's very flexible, actually. He's actually one of the true flex units in the set. If you just hit Cassante 2, just play Cassante 2. They're nerfing his durability, so that way he's less tanky, but I think it's justified. I also think that not many people asked for Cassante nerf because it also felt like good to be so flexible, but this is also yet another Yuumi nerf as well because Cassante is one of the primary tanks in Yuumi. They're also nerfing Leona. Her resistance steal per potential. This nerfs both the Yuumi comp and anything related to a Battle Academia Leona tank line. So if you're playing around like Katarina or you're playing around Jace Caitlyn, this makes her a little bit worse. Yuumi in general, probably they just don't want Yuumi to stall too much. And remember, the pacing of combat, they're trying to bring it down in general. Why they're seeing so many nerfs, some of the current things, is because they want to bring the power level down. I mean, I argue they're buffing a pretty decent amount, right? They buff like the 3 costs, for example, and they're buffing some of the 2 costs, but they're doing that. Now, Poppy gets one of the biggest adjustments throughout the patch. They're actually restructuring for her primary spell damage. Currently, if you cast with Poppy, her damage scales off of physical damage and health. So if you gave her health, that damage would just basically be off of her bop, right? And we saw some best defense Poppies, for example, in Star Guardians being very good, so on and so forth. They're taking that and they're giving it to her spell shield to make her a better tank. They don't want Poppy to be just like this hybrid, like half tank, half damage, and Star Guardian's super dependent on her. And remember, they're buffing 6 heavyweight, right? So the 6 heavyweight gives more max HP, which also gives AD. If you haven't played much heavyweight converts a certain percentage of HP to physical damage. So theoretically, this is one of the things that should buff Poppy in that regard. Now, the thing is, when they restructure this, that's how they test it. But it very well could be that itemization and power up changes, and all of a sudden, Poppy changes roles dramatically. It could also be one of the things where the meta is very hostile to it, and it ends up being a nerf. That's why it's like some of these like yellow numbers that I'm not sure. Also, they did buff Poppy 3 just as a fun thing for 4,000 because the HP compensation isn't there, so they want to make sure you can do some damage. Not that anyone cares about Poppy 3. So we'll see, right? This combined with the 6 heavyweight, really hard to say. It's just really abstract. Are we supposed to play 6 heavyweight Smolder, right? That was actually a build on PvE. You would reroll like Smolder with the heavyweights, and then maybe Poppy's your frontliner. Maybe 6 heavyweights is good, and you pick. Someone said Ascension in chat. Maybe you pick like augments like that. You just stall out. I don't know. It's gonna be something interesting. It's a big patch. By the way, we're about halfway through the patch. If you guys are taking track, Ride's getting nerfed. I don't think anyone is surprised by this. Specifically, his 4 mentor form is getting nerfed. They're reducing his 1-star and 2-star damage, just doing too much. They're also nerfing his power-ups as well. So you might be thinking there's not enough. They're nerfing some of his power-ups, like Icebender. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Samira is getting buffed, and her single target damage is every single time she casts her style, right? There's 2 phases of Samira. The first is that she racks up something called style, which is a resource. And if she hits, I think, 4 style, 3 to 4 style, she jumps in and does a big AoE. So her single target burst is actually going to go higher. And remember that this is also, she has built-in AD scaling with Soul Fighter. Her Soul Fighter gets more AD as time goes on. So the first round of single target damage, probably not going to be that crazy, but the second round is going to hit harder. And if she somehow gets to a third round of single target damage, it should be cleaning up fights. And Samira is a very underwhelming forecast. I think most people have actually memed Samira most of the set ever since Soul Fighters were really good. And so this should bring her back. It looks like on paper a pretty dang strong buff. And then Yuumi is getting nerfed as well. So Yuumi direct nerfs, Leona nerf, Cassandre nerf, Prodigy nerf, and you're about to find out, but Archangels is getting nerfed as well in a couple of ways. It's been fun. An 07 for our favorite cat, or maybe our least favorite cat, but I think Yuumi is getting gutted. We'll see. They're buffing Twisted Fate's base damage and reducing his mark damage. So let's explain Twisted Fate. So Twisted Fate throws a bunch of cards. Every single time he auto attacks, he throws a bunch of cards. The thing, and all the champions that he gets hit by these cards get marked by he just throws on an extra mark on them. When he casts, he does a physical amount of damage, and then he does a magical amount of damage that explodes the marks. The problem with this is that Twisted Fate is incentivized to build a lot of attack speed, right? Because the more you're attacking, the more marks you're making. But then sometimes the champions would die before the marks exploded. So you spend all your time marking these units, and then when he casts, he's actually not doing that much. And so this actually created a dynamic where Twisted Fate can't actually primary carry very much because he's not actually doing that much. And so I don't know if you guys have ever hit Twisted Fate 2 on level 8. Like I actually did that yesterday, and I think I went like 4th barely by the skin of my teeth. I had 6 Juggernaut Twisted Fate 2 because I was looking for something else. And I was like, oh my gosh, I hit Twisted Fate 2 and 8. Everyone's like, oh my god, you won the game. And I'm like, not really. Like I feel the problem with Twisted Fate is that he actually kind of has inconsistencies about his ability. So they're trying to bring that back and adjust it so that way it feels like Twisted Fate can primary carry with just doing a good amount of damage without feeling he has to mark everything and scale the fight. And this is why he's been more of a duo carry buff, or duo carry specifically on for Varus. Zyra, by the way, huge nerf to her utility. She's not going to give a bunch of attack speed anymore. Her plant health got cut at the stem. Crazy. But that's because they want to make her more of a carry now. They're like, if you hit Zyra too, it shouldn't feel bad to hit Zyra 2. Again, going back to what happens if you fast 9 or you hit Zyra 2 on 8. Are you excited? Do you think that you feel like you hit Zyra 2, you should be able to win a lot of fights? In fact, it's been kind of embarrassing. Sometimes you hit Zyra 2, Shojin Archangel's JG, and you're like, that didn't do anything. I felt like I killed like 2 units and that was it. So they're trying to make that Zyra a better primary, but they can't just have her kit be overloaded. So they want you to have to want Zyra besides just her plant toy. Zyra should be more than just like a frontline utility bot, or holding Morello or something like that. So they're adjusting it. Whether or not that's a success, okay, because the thing is, this damage doesn't look like that big, but you have to remember she summons a bunch of plants, right, to do all the damage. So we'll see, right? It's hard to kind of tell because I haven't actually played Zyra primary in God knows how long. But yeah, maybe this ends up being something where it's like Crystal Gambit spikes are crazy. If you hit like Zyra. Maybe Fast 9 is AP now. You can play Fast 9 AP, play Zyra Gwen, because that was actually something that people played. People played Zyra Gwen Yone instead of like Varus Twisted Fate Zyra. So maybe more Fast 9 options open now, which I would like. One of my criticisms about the Fast 9 Varus, and by the way, this is the end of 5 cost. They're not nerfing Varus. They actually buff Varus, but because they buff things like Wraith. Is that I think the board is actually not dynamic. I actually think the thing about Fast 9 Varus is that you can flex, and a lot of times you will because you won't get to the Twisted Fate and Desire and things like that. But the Fast 9 Varus board is like pretty soft. I think like most people like roll for the exact 9 units, especially if you get triple econ. You're on Scuttle Puddle, you take Hedge Fund, you take Invested, you take whatever, and you're like, well, I'm just gonna play the exact same 9 units because that's just been too soft. I think that's a really bad thing. So I'm glad that they're trying to make 5 cost more dynamic. These resistances on Yone technically got buffs. They're buffing Mech. They're buffing Yone. Yone technically also got nerfed by the attack speed stuff. If you're just joining us, we talked about fighters. Is it here? Fighters getting nerfed with their resistances. So, Yone is okay, I guess, if you hit the Mech setup. Oops, sorry. But not particular. We'll see. It helps him make it a little bit tankier. He has fighters now get attack speed, which is good for Yone because he's a melee attacker. Maybe he's good. But so far, I don't think anyone's like thinking Yone is amazing. So I think it's justified. So those are all the champions. Let's go into augments. So augments actually don't have that many changes, which surprised me personally. I think one of the biggest sources of imbalances right now actually are augments, and some power-ups. But they actually didn't do that many changes. So there's only one of 2 slides, and each slide is like only like 4 or 5. So the first changes is give him the Chair Mundo. This augment has not been performing particularly well. And one of the more awkward things that give him the chair actually has Mundo be a 3-range unit, which, as you guys know, the walk up is like so awkward. So they're just giving him extra range, giving him mana. That's a pretty big adjustment. So maybe the Mundo, and they're also rebuffing Luchador's heal. So maybe Mundo, giving the chair Mundo is good. You never know. One thing for sure is I probably will be clicking it, and I probably will be going bot for it, and I probably will get laughed at by chat, but it'll be a fun time. Mess Hall is no longer something you can get at 2-1. You don't really want Mess Hall at 2-1. It just feels like a bait. So they're probably just excluding from 2-1. Unless I'm missing something, and Mess Hall is amazing at 2-1. But it's one of those augments that scale the better your team is. But your team is terrible at the beginning of the game. You're playing Mess Hall, and they have 3-star Garen from Build-A-Bud. It's like, nice. 9,000 volts cannon got buffed. This is a huge buff, actually. This is one of those things where I was surprised. I actually thought 9,000 volts cannon was like not even that bad. I thought it was like the second best hero augment out of all the silvers compared to Perfect Form. I thought that it was way better than Malphite and Story Weaver Garen. So this is surprising to me. This might make Protagonist really good now because the Zac, they're not nerfing perfect form Zac. So Protagonist has some big hits potentially, especially if you have open rod. They also have another thing for Kennen coming up as well, another buff for Kennen, which we'll show you. And it's actually pretty exciting. So I'll tell you guys in that in a little bit. Space Camp. Whenever you upgrade a crew champion, gain a random 1 to 2 cost crew champion. That's being readjusted to whenever you upgrade a 1 cost crew champion, not any crew champion, you'll get a 1 to 3 cost crew champion. And I was writing this on 5 hours of sleep, so I really couldn't understand the math of this. I don't know if this is a buff or a nerf. I'm assuming that it's a nerf because you can't get it off of Shen upgrades anymore, but you can get 3 costs. It's a giant nerf. It's a buff. It's a nerf. It's definitely a nerf. I mean, I think it's a nerf because you can't get bonuses off of Shen 2 anymore. I don't know what this means, but they might be worried that this is too strong of an augment with the new crew rework. It could be one of those things where Space Camp was like too good at accelerating your game plan to get to things like Ziggs 3 and Gen 3, but it's possible. We are confused. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it caps the number of rewards you can get. So, but also maybe like now that you can get Ziggs, it's like a big deal. Rest in peace, if so. Teachers Council no longer increases bonuses by fermenters by 10%. Once upon a time, I need to tell you guys a story. Once upon a time, at the very beginning of PBE for Set 15 KO Coliseum, Teachers Council used to increase the bonus for mentor by 100%. It used to just read, Teachers Council increased the bonuses from mentors by 100%. We've officially gone. That's correct. You might be thinking, isn't that kind of that? But you're telling me, Frodan, that they've decreased this from 100 to 0 over the course of 4.5 patches. That is correct. No longer increases bonuses for mentors by 10%. It is now down to 0. The first true 100 to 0 combo in TFT. That's a fighting game reference usually. It's like 0 to 100 or 100 to 0 or one touch kill or whatever. And the the Council's champion has been also nerfed from Udyr to Kubuko. I'm assuming most people consider that a nerf. Technically, it's like a 3 cost, 2 cost, which down 1 gold. But some people are like, well, Kubuko's better anyways, not a straight up nerf. I don't think anyone's saying that. I think this is a nerf. This is it. We only have 5 more augment changes. Twilight Assault Shen is getting buffed. This is the other hero augment. They're just doing buffs to hero augments. Twilight Assault Shen reduced the amount of mana to cast and the base attack speed. That's pretty big buff, especially because Shen cares about his auto attack. So this is very big. Maybe Shen hero augment is really good now because remember, he has to attack 3 times to get his true damage in. But he needs to cast to do that, right? So it's something that has very good feedback loop there. So big buff. Prismatic Pipeline has been disabled from the game. Another salute as we send off Prismatic Pipeline. A moment of silence for one of the most ridiculously swingy augments in the game, especially if you got earlier augments at 2.6. It's not all bad. They're actually reintroducing 2 Prismatic augments from different sets. Back in set 12, there's an augment called Giant and Mighty. Your team gets larger. Big boys, big chungus. Gaining 300 health and 4% max HP. This was a really good generic combat augment. But that's not all. They're also reintroducing Tiny but Deadly. This was, you guys remember Tiny but Deadly Yone reroll in set 11? Umbral Reaper Yone Tiny but Deadly. Good stuff. Your team is 50% smaller, but moves and attacks 30% faster. The size has a little bit to do with like pathing and targeting, but I don't know how that interacts with fighters versus tanks, so we'll see. Why are they introducing this? Because I think one of the number one sources of criticism for augment balance, in my opinion, is that there are a bigger batch of unclickables, especially at the prismatic tier. And I think that if you watch a lot of streamers or you like play a lot of games yourself, one of the biggest problems about prismatic augments, like a prismatic parties at 4-2, it feels like you have nothing that you can click on. And you're forced to click on other things that feel bad. Like you don't even want a coronation, right? Because you don't even have a team slot, but you need something that's like okay if you don't want to take things that are transformative to your game. And so they're trying to introduce more generic combat prismatics because everything is so hyper specific. Like gamble your entire game on a Call to Chaos, or you need to be in a spot to take invested plus to like go a higher level, or quality over quantity, things like that are just like not that amazing. And so they're trying to give you more safe generic options for prismatic, which might be a little bit more boring, but I think is like more grounded. And these are just 2 options that they're doing. And also, just to give you a frame of reference, if you don't know how good these were like a lot of people click these augments back when they were in the game. So click them, especially Giant and Mighty. Giant and Mighty will be very good, especially if you're playing heavyweights, protectors. If you're playing like 6 heavyweights, 6 protectors, six bash, and that type of setup, Giant Mighty is gonna be really good. If you're playing Star Guardians, Giant Mighty is gonna be really good. If you're playing like anything that's like that benefits off of it from the additional bonus of this HP, you should be clicking it. Giant Mighty is going to be just a generically good one. And finally, Radiant Relics and Radiant Refractor are now exclusive from each other. So they're trying to just lower overall the ridiculousness of like double Radiance plus like an artifact. I've encountered that many times actually, even just this patch. So they're just trying to cut down the number of times you can just get like a crazy unit that has like 6 to 8 items or something like that. 2 Radiant items, which each Radiant item is worth 2 items, and an artifact, and a power-up, and augments that buff it is just too much. So they're trying to reduce some of that. So those are the augment changes. We're now in item territory. I told you a little bit. I previewed a little bit, but I said Archangels was getting nerfed. It is. They're buffing the base AP, but they're nerfing how much AP you get every 5 seconds. So this is yet another thing that impacts things like Yuumi. This is another thing that impacts something like Rise. They're generally trying to lower the amount of like burst towards the end parts of the fight. So I think it's going to be one of those things where Archangels is going to be harder to slam. I believe it or not, I actually think this is a bigger deal for early game than it is late game, because early game fights tend to drag out really long, right? An Archangel Slam at the beginning of the game is like you're playing a Lucian 1 and an Aatrox 1 versus a Rel 1 and a Syndra 1, and like no one's killing each other. So you usually, I mean, a lot of times you go to overtime. Archangels is really good early game, and if the fights go long, because late game fights are so explosive, so it tends to not. You might get cut off earlier. So we'll see what ends up this doing, but this should be like yet another nerf to Yuumi and Prodigies, which is rough. But this also nerfs Rise, and who else uses Archangels? This nerfs like there's like some other weird stuff like Kog'Maw and Rakan. I don't know if you guys have been paying attention, but Rakan actually built Archangels in his reroll line with Xayah. So we'll see. Blue buff. Blue buff, I think this 5 to 6 mana buff in general last patch was a little unnecessary, but I think it was like fine-ish. But the not so great secret was that blue buff was just like a lot better than Shojin in a lot of ways, because they also nerfed Shojin. So people were just building blue buff like a lot. Like if you're playing, I think the exception would be like Samira, because she wanted to get the 1 auto cast. But blue buff was on average, on balance, a lot better than Shojin. Now they're actually reworking blue buff to nerf that mana regen, which is a big deal. But now they're also giving additional AD and AP from all sources. So if you play blue buff in Sorcerers, for example, on Karma, you get an additional 9 AP because you get 90 AP from Sorks. And then that also works with power-ups. If your power-up gives you, let's just say your power gives you 30 AP, that's an additional 3 AP. If your augment gives you additional AP, that gives you more AP as well. So it's like all those things that continues to feed into it. So blue buff might actually be really insane now, especially for other champions that might want hybrid damage. Oh, sorry, Sorcerers is 80. My bad. Okay, well, 80 AP, but you get what I mean. This sounds like a really big buff on paper, and that might make one of these things where blue buff is really strong. We'll see. Maybe it's not that big of a deal, but I think that the fact that it double dips is really, really strong. Giant Slayer is now getting buffed. This item in general has this item's actually a little underrated. You know, if you're talking about like the Malphite 3, you're talking about the Udyr 2 Colossal, Giant Slayer actually is like more buildable than people think. The problem with Giant Slayer this patch has been that the sword and the bow are really expensive components. You don't really want to use sword and bow for Giant Slayer, especially early game. And then it also runs into some problem late game where it's not that good late game relative to, because Giant Slayer only targets tanks And so, or sorry, you only get the bonus on tanks. And if you're trying to like kill a backliner or like a fighter, it didn't really like impact. Like you don't kill their carries, right? Like let's say they have who's like a thick fighter that's problematic to deal with. It's all about Darius 3 and Kaisa. Giant Slayer doesn't kill Darius 3 that much. And in the late stages of the game, you really need to kill that Darius as soon as possible because he's just going to go infinite on you, right? So Giant Slayer has not been preferred, and they're just trying to raise it so that it feels like you're not. It's just 5% damage jump is nice. It's a pretty significant buff. Kraken's Fury is getting, in my opinion, nerfed, but they're technically quote reworking it. So maybe it's not a strict nerf. There might be some situations where it's good. Now, currently, the way Kraken stands is that as you attack, you can stack 3 AD infinitely. You can get as many stacks as you want as long as the fight goes on. And that's really, really strong for some users like Ashe, Xayah, Jinx. But now you're capped at 20 attacks. So you can get 60 bonus AD and you can't go infinite, Sag. But at 20 stacks, what they'll give you instead is 40% attack speed, which is a really big deal. And so 40% attack speed is a big burst, and that's permanent. It's not like a decaying attack speed that goes away. It's just straight up 40 attack speed. So maybe specifically good, or maybe it's fine. Maybe it's fine. Maybe it's actually okay because you don't even need more AD after 20 attacks, and it's a straight buff. But either way, they're also nerfing the baseline attack damage that it gets, so that feels a lot worse. I think this is just straight up a nerf, but they're technically reworking it. Maybe some units will like it from different perspectives. Maybe it's just not Jinx and Ashe anymore. Maybe you can put this on, Smolder or something. I don't know. maybe a Rageblade Kraken Smolder build can surface now. Probably not. We'll see. Nashers. They're reworking Nashers as well. Nashers no longer gives you mana regen. It reduced number of AP it gets. You are going to get crit strike chance instead. They're actually reworking Nashers 2 to be a mana gain for crit users. So if you're building things like Infinity Edge and Jewel Gauntlet, you actually might want Nashers now. Because if you crit, it actually gives you some synergy with the crit and also helps you cast your ability faster. It's kind of weird. But basically, Nashers Tooth has not found its identity at all this set. Chat, if I challenge chat to name 2 good Nashers holders, they would be really stretching it. They'd be like, maybe it's like playable on Rise and like Syndra when she had good Rising Chaos. Lux. I mean, yeah, you're right. Like Lux. And no one out here, when's the last time you guys played Lux reroll? Actually, when we get to the power-up section, that might change. A little bit of a preview. Nashor's Tooth is going to be changed now, so to grant 2 bonus mana. So, generally speaking, not a really desirable item. You want to save your bows. Maybe they de-emphasize things like Kraken's Fury, and you get Nashor's Tooth now with your bows instead. We'll see. This sounds like, in general, pretty good, though. You're like, 2 mana for if they crit. Well, you have to remember, auto attacks can crit as well, so you might get some really powerful interactions here with Nashor's Tooth. Don't sleep on it. Then we have Quicksilver base attack speed getting nerfed, but the rework to Quicksilver is now it gets stacking attack speed per second. Now you might be thinking, hold on, isn't that what Rageblade does? Rageblade gives stacking attack speed per second, so Quicksilver, Rageblade, no diff. My interpretation of that is that Quicksilver should now be the melee fighter version of Rageblade. You're not looking to play Rageblade on units like Garen's Hero Augment. You're not looking to put Rageblade on Akali. You probably want to play Quicksilver on her instead. So I think that's what they want Quicksilver to be. But to try and make sure that it's not an overkitted stat or overloaded stat kit, whatever I'm trying to say, they're reducing the base attack speed. So if you do the math, after about 7 seconds, you're basically at base. And then after about 15 seconds, you are like doing pretty well. And then at 20 seconds, well, the CC expiration might have something to do with that as well. But Quicksilver should be a more desirable item to slam now, especially early game. I think Quicksilver is a much better slam early game now. So if you have Gnar and you're trying to play the Golden Edge Gnar, you don't have a bow, guess what? You can slam Quicksilver on Gnar, and that's also perfectly fine. Red buff, the attack speed. Red buff's just getting a straight up buff. Red buff is actually, in my opinion, in a lot of cases, better than Morello. Like Twisted Fate would much rather have red buff than Morello, for example, and he's like a person that's like really good at applying it. So, but that's not the case against everybody. I remember when I looked at the stats for like Yumi, red buff was better than Morello. But that's probably because you want the rod to go towards the Yumi. So I'm not entirely sure. This felt like that wasn't that necessary. I feel like red buff's like a pretty decent item. So, but that's okay. I mean, I guess the stats on it was underperforming. This is surprising. This is a surprising buff to me. Maybe they just want more people to pick up bows on carousel because bows not that popular. Is red buff already good or am I tripping? I think it's already good. Items 2 of 4, rating items. This page is probably the easiest page to read, even though there's a million words on it. This is basically just the radiant version of this. So Archangel's base staff. Okay, they're actually double nerfing Radiant Archangels. Way too good. If you guys looked at Radiant Archangels, best Radiant item in the game by far. Amazing on Rise, amazing on Yumi, amazing on anybody that wants Radiant Archangels as well. Really good on Seraphine, if you ever played on Seraphine. In the Star Guardian setup, she was kind of nuts. So they're just nerfing it across the board. Things like Kraken getting reworked, same thing as well. Kraken, the rework is here. Gain 20 additional AD and AP from all sources. It's a double of 10. So a lot of this is just like you already kind of picked it up if you saw the previous slide. It's just basically the same thing as this. Is the Radiant form of it. They are like hard nerfing some elements of it though, like Radiant Blue buff getting a big nerf, Radiant Archangel's getting nerfed, Radiant Quicksilver and Radiant Nashers getting their stats reworked as well. But if I were to take a crack at it, I'm pretty sure Radiant Nashers is insane. I think Radiant Nashers sounds like the biggest winner out of all these items, just purely looking at the numbers. If you have one crit item, you basically will finish your crit because 35% is huge. And you get 8 mana if you crit. That's kind of like a Shojin. And you're getting other stats as well, like 30 ability power on top of that. Radiant Asher sounds really, really good. So it's something to think about. If I were to take one guess on this, it sounds really strong to me. Artifact nerf pass. This is probably going to be a lot of people's favorite page of the patch notes. We're in the last leg of this, by the way. We're almost done with patch notes. Oh, just kidding. We're 75% of the way through. Fishbones is getting a pretty big nerf. 20% attack speed nerf. Some people are going to argue that the range is the problem on Fishbones, but attack speed is a big deal because that often affects how much they cast. And the reality is, contrary to what people might be saying in chat, they're not trying to make Fishbones completely useless. If you reduce the range of it, it generally feels like not as effective. So they are nerfing it. Flickerblade is getting yet another tick down on nerf. They're slowly ticking down Flickerblade more and more. I think at one point it was like 6 and 7 or something like that. Now it's at 3 and 4. So it's maybe Flickerblades is finally going to be in a reasonable spot for some of those users, but Flickerblade in general is really strong. Flicka. And then Infinity Force get a big buff. This is actually a pretty big deal because you have to remember that Infinity Force buffs every stat. So 5 armor, 5 MR, 5 AD, 5 AP, more HP. Just after a certain point, you just have like a critical amount of stats. So I think Infinity Force might actually be more pickable now. They're also changing some of the way fighters work, so you're getting more attack speed, so you get more mana gen. It could be that Infinity Force has a role in the game now, because right now it's basically not even a jack of all trades. Whatever is the whatever is like the step below jack. Because the problem with Infinity Force this set is that they removed starting mana as a stat, right? Starting mana is not really a stat except for on Protector's Vow or very specific instances. So Infinity Force lost that, so it just got like huge nerf. So now they're trying to compensate that. And also, you know what? The thematic of it feels a lot better because Infinity Force in League of Legends was called Trinity Force, and it gave you like three, the Trinity Force 330. It's flavor wise, it just makes a lot more sense. So this actually feels a lot better. Innervating Locket. We talked about how there's a lot of problems with Innervating Locket for the users that want it. I actually think this is kind of sad because Innervating Locket is very, very, very narrow. You only really want to play it on very specific champions. And so this just makes Innervating Locket pretty much unpickable. I think it's The thing is, it's really good on Garen. It's really good on Garen in particular because Garen can cast and gain permanent HP. If you're not familiar, you take Intervening Locket, you put Garen, you give him tank items. Then Garen will cast, and his prodigy, or not, sorry, his Battle Academia potential gives him permanent max HP every time he casts, which is likely to lead him to a next cast because he's taking a lot of damage. And the more permanent HP stacks means he's more likely to stack. And because you're not actually building damage items, you end up going really long, and you get something obscene like a 11,000 HP Garen 2. Not even a Garen 3, a Garen 2 usually goes that hard. So they're nerfing that. That's a pretty big deal. We'll see. We'll see if that's enough. We'll see if it's still broken. We'll see if it's unplayable. Lich Bane's getting buffed by stage. So stage 4, 5, 6. Basically, stage 5 damage will now be stage 4 damage, and stage 6 will be stage 5. That's warranted. Lich Bane's not great. Mana Zane is getting nerfed. Yet another thing about some of these other lines that want to play around Mana Zane getting nerfed. That's a pretty big deal. Mana Zane generically really too good. Rapid Fire is... Oh, wait, this should be green. I made a mistake. Rapid Fire is getting buffed. 66 to 75 is a buff. I don't know why that's red. My bad there. But Rapid Fire Cannon getting an attack speed buff to 75%. So maybe more desirable. Silvermere Dawn is getting buffed. Woo! Okay, so they over-nerfed Silvermere Dawn a lot. Like, Silvermere Dawn, I don't know if you guys saw, is horrendous in the stats. I think if you like look at worst item in the game that's not like a component, it's Silvermere Dawn. Silvermere Dawn. Okay, Crystal Gambit is up there as well. But it's like Silvermere Dawn is awful. It's just so bad. So they're buffing it right now. It is 120 AD instead. By the way, it's not truly unplayable. You actually still can play Silvermere Dawn in niche scenarios, but yeah, it's generally not good. Then finally, they're actually bug fixing Suspicious Trenchcoat in a really important way. Now, it properly applies the Shadow Clone debuff to clones that spit out. If you don't know, yeah, I guess you have 1 day to abuse this if you want on the live server. But Trenchcoat, if you put it on a Shadow Clone buff unit from Power Up, when they split, they don't lose. They actually summon real copies. So one strategy that people were playing was to push a Trenchcoat on a Caitlyn 3, then have Caitlyn with Shadow Clone split into 4 Caitlyn's, or 3 Caitlyn's, and then those Caitlyn's would have Protector's Vow to all cast, and then they would shoot and kill the backline. And that was like way too OP. So people who are doing this were bug abusing a lot for LP. It is what it is. And now that's finally out of the game. Thank goodness. Then the final change to items is a consistency update for the term combat start. It's missing a quotation mark. Combat start now triggers effects only if the item is on the champion when the combat starts. Additional effects will function differently now when you do it in the middle of combat. So if you slam a Crown Guard in the middle of combat, it will gain AP, but it won't gain the shield. But before, I believe, they just want to clarify this so that way. Because before people were like, oh, if I slam a Quicksilver in the middle of fight, do I get CC immunity? You used to, but now no longer it does. But you will get stacking attack speed. Protected Vow no longer grants combat start mana if plays miss combat. So this is just like a straight up, make sure your items are on champions at the start of the fight if you want it. You can't cheese things, right? Sometimes you would hold Quicksilver and you would like theoretically slam Quicksilver in the middle of the fight to like stop an important stun. You don't really get that anymore. So they're just making it more consistent. All right, and the last major section is power-ups. There are new champion-specific power-ups to create new reroll comps. This is deliberate by Riot. They want to create new comps, and this is probably some of the more exciting things in the patch if you care about this. Lux is getting a Lux-specific power-up called Shine Brighter. Every other cast, Lux's spell explodes in a 2-hex radius and deals 10% more damage. So basically, if you want to play Lux reroll, you want to look at Shine Brighter, right? This is more things like Fan Service. This is more things like Pursuit Lucian, Rising Chaos Syndra, so on and so forth. Aatrox is getting his own power-up. Aatrox called Mecha Blade. Aatrox gains attack speed equal to 4% of his maximum HP, and Aatrox is heavyweight. And his attacks gain 5 bonus mana. Also really interesting. You know, does that mean that Aatrox carry is going to be a thing in heavyweights? Maybe you play him in something else. Not sure. Supreme Surge Kennen. I said Kennen's going to get something else as well, not just his hero augment. Whenever an enemy is executed by Supreme Cell, Kennen heals 15% of his missing HP and gains 15 mana. So this actually turns Kennen into a big-time tank. Or something else. Maybe a big stun bot. I'm not sure what that means for Kennen, but we'll see. Golden Glove Kabuko. When you gain interest, gain 1.5 AD per gold collected. If you remember, there's a little bit of a hero augment mechanic when Kabuko was first introduced back in set 11, where I believe Kabuko was a 1 cost. Now, Kabuko, when you gain interest, gain 1.5 AD per gold collected. So if you start off with Hedge Fund and you get Golden Gloves Kabuko, there's gonna be some interesting tubers. Veteran is only gonna affect 3 units. This is actually a trio: Katarina, Xayah, and Callista. This unit becomes a mentor, and they now grant 4 damage amp, and their mentor upgrade is 35 AZ and AP. So what that means is you have to choose one of the other mentors to exclude. So if you're playing Xayah, for example, you're not going to exclude Yasuo. You're going to play Xayah, Yasuo, and maybe 2 other units. Maybe Udyr and Kabuko for frontline. Maybe you cut Ryze. And now you can play 4 mentor Xayah. Maybe you play Katarina as the executioner and you keep Ryze, but you cut Yasuo and you play 5 executioner. Maybe Callista is also working that way. This is theoretically supposed to open up way more reroll lines. That also might mean that it's even harder to hit mentor. 5 mentor, I'm pretty sure you're supposed to play 4 mentor, but I actually didn't test this on PvE, so maybe I'm wrong. But I think theoretically you're supposed to just play 4 mentor. Drift Duo. Senna and Lucian now gain 3 mana regen. If both are 3 costs, gain +1 mech. So now there's something that basically this is the equivalent of getting a mech emblem, or I guess back in the day we called it a heart. Silver tier augments used to give you, like, if you got protector heart, you would get +1 heart but no emblem. If you got like a assassin heart or executioner heart, you get +1 executioner. Same thing. Senna and Lucian get +3 mana regen, and both at 3-star get a 1+1 mech. So maybe you can go 7 mech while rerolling Senna and Lucian, and reroll mech is a thing now. Starry Night. Rel gains 6% HP and 10 AP for every 1 cost unit you field. 3-star units count double. So a little bit of play on words there. I'm not sure what this is. Maybe you reroll Rel and Syndra and Garen and Ezreal and you play reroll Prodigies. That's probably going to be a thing. But, you know, maybe there's something more to it that I'm not sure. But either way, this is one of the most exciting slides. If you care about novelty, there should be a lot more comps. I'm pretty sure our tier list on TFT Academy is going to get really, really full. We might have to think about something about how to address that. But this should be really exciting stuff. The second wave, the second round of power-ups, and this is why I think that this is not a nerf heavy patch, because I think power-ups buffs are some of the most important things you could do in this set. They're buffing adaptive resistances again from 60 to 80. That used to be in the 50s at one point, so that's a really big deal. All out. Anyone miss All Out Cassante? Now the All Out AD is back, so maybe All Out Cassante sees it play. Attack Expert getting buffed. Bestest Boy. This is the monster training stuff. Where you get extra stats. So every few seconds, you get more AD for Smolder. Every few seconds, you get more AP for Kog'Maw. Bladed Nado is getting buffed. This is just generic like AD stuff. I think Bladed Nado. Desperado is the same thing where you attack 12 times. You deal damage based off your AD. These are like kind of generic ones. The ones that's surprising to me is Bludgeoner is getting buffed. I thought Bludgeoner was actually pretty decent. But now they're giving you even more armor ignore, so this might actually be one of the best ones for AD champions in general. They removed a couple of other ones, and the reason why I don't have it in red because I guess it depends on how you interpret it, if it's a buff or a nerf. But Desperado is no longer on Gnar, Double Track is no longer on Udyr. Fairy Tail is getting buffed again, so they're buffing the top end of it. I don't know if this means that there's one more stage of scaling or it just buffs the stage 6 scaling, I believe. But I believe it should be stage 6. That is really good theoretically for stuff like Kog'Maw or other carries that really care about like Fairy Tail's damage instances. Final boss. This is the one that says when your allies die, get damage amp for yourself. So you're getting more. And this doesn't sound like a lot, but if you have 6 units die, you're getting a lot of damage amp, 27 damage amp, which is pretty a lot. Final Ascent is getting buffed. This is, I believe, Kale's specific power up. So now Final Ascent is getting buffed, so it's less, I guess, like the important thing is level 7. If you make it to level 10 with Kale, you probably don't need this buff. But if you make it to level 7, at least you get something. But overall, Final Ascent was probably performing a little bad because I think Kale is just too risky if you miss. Pushing levels is kind of hard. Finalist, this is damage amp for every eliminated player in the game getting a buff. This is only the thing that you should ever take if you feel like it's kind of like Tomb Raider, only if you feel like you're in a good spot for it. Gather Force is getting buffed as AD. No one's particularly super happy about that one, so maybe it's more playable. Hungry Hero, this is the one where you feed the champion. This is the Briar passive one where you could like bite yourself. You could just sacrifice to get more stats. So maybe you can feed your sons and daughters and child. Hyperactive is on takedown, get more attack speed. So maybe you get more attack speed. It's pretty good on like Jinx, for example. Oh, heavyweights. Yeah, you can heavyweight Jace and maybe some other heavyweights as well. Icebender's getting nerfed. This is one of the rise nerfs I was talking about. Icebender getting nerfed is a big deal. It's one of his best power-ups. So that's another thing. Kenai is getting buffed again. So Kenai and Bludgeoner both have similar numbers, 45%. So that is a very desirable one now, I think, especially if you don't have any Shred or Sunder. Living Wall is giving more attack speed per resistances. That is, it combines your armor and magic resistance and give attack speed for your backline. Magic reduction, mage damage reduction is actually a buff. It might look weird, but basically, mage says cast twice, but your damage is nerfed by 25%. Now it's only nerfed by 20%. This is actually a really big buff to specific units that really want mage. So I'm thinking about like Karma, for example. Karma, this is a bit, because some people are like, why not buff like Sixorix? This actually might make, this actually might put Karma back on the menu. Plus they're buffing 7 mech and other things around it. So don't sleep on that. Mage Expert or Magic Expert got buffed, so it gives you more AP. Max Arcana and every max thing in general now tracks remainder kills instead of resetting to 0. So I believe Max Arcana and Max Speed are like every, X amount of takedowns or kills, you get a stacking bonus. Now that actually rolls over to the next round instead of resetting to 0, which is a big deal. But now they're slowing you down because they don't want you to just snowball out of control. It worked like that. I didn't even know it worked like that, to be honest. So that's actually a big change. Mech Pilot is now getting nerfed. There was a bug where it was getting way too much stats. I don't know if they've bug fixed that. We haven't got to the bug fix section. They're nerfing that, though. And also, they're buffing mech in other ways, so not that big of a deal. Ordinary is the build different trait. If you have no active traits on this unit, get more stats. I played it twice. It was not impressive either time. I moved my power up, but I felt like I wasted a fruit. They're just buffing it again. This is the third time they buffed it. Over 9,000. Over 9,000 getting buffed because it has been pretty underwhelming since they took away the mana regen nerf. So now AD, AP, and attack speed will give 5% instead of 4. Health will now give 50 instead of 40. And that's not all. Over 9,000 will give more resistances. However, now over 9,000 will no longer be offered on Dr. Mundo, Malphite, Rammus, Rel, Shen, Udyr, and Vi. So we lost a good amount of units that could get it. Probably because they don't want these tanks to get out of control. Like, if you got HP, like, imagine when Mundo was in his prime, you can get 50 HP and 8 resistances on over 9,000. That'd be way too good, right? If prime Mundo. So, like, I think they're trying to avoid situations like that where the tank could just become unkillable. Pack Tactics. Pack Tactics got buffed, which is Neferi's best power up. That's one. Neferi is really good with Pack Tactics. That plus Soul Fighter, plus the Samira buffs means Soul Fighter should be back. Serious Slam. This one's a pretty big change. Bonus damage can no longer critically strike or apply damage amp. Will now deal damage based on the owner's basic attack damage rather than be affected by attack overrides, like Volibear, for example. So I think this is just a straight nerf. But they did buff its damage, so technically it's like an adjustment. I don't know what to think about it. I'm assuming this is just a nerf. Maybe Serious Name is like way too good. Singularity can no longer critically strike or apply damage jam. Didn't even know. I thought Singularity was quite trash, quite frankly. It could crit. Didn't know. They're trying to make it more consistent where the damage from the power-up doesn't crit, because Stormbender was also critting, and they removed that. Socialite nerf. I think a lot of people are happy about that. Slight round of applause for the Socialite nerf. It was way too overstated. You were getting 150 HP on your entire team with damage amp. It was lasting way too long. So now Socialite will get nerfed, and the amount of rounds reduced. So you can't cover your whole board. At least he's going to have trouble covering a lot of boards. You're going to have to play a little bit more thoughtfully, and you can't make mistakes. So Socialite is getting taken down a peg. Soul Chipper MR reduction. This is the one where every instance of magic damage, it reduces the magic resistance more. So it got reduced from 4 to 5, or it got buffed from 4 to 5. Standalone is getting nerfed, so it only gives 30% HP. So now that's the one where you get where you want to solo frontline or second row. Strong Spark is every time you stun, you deal a little bit of damage. It's mainly on Jarvan and Kennen, so maybe that ends up being good. Surge 66, you get more base attack speed, which is nice. Unstoppable Dash is slightly distance, slightly shortened. And then Tiny Terror, the duration is going to last 33 seconds, but they'll give you more attack speed instead. So those are all the power-up changes. This is some of the biggest parts of the patch, because I think power-up changes in general are a really big deal. Okay. You guys may have gotten a quick glimpse of it, but we're about to read something that you guys. I need everyone to stay calm, okay? I need everyone to stay calm, because this is going to be driving chat wild. You guys promise to stay calm? We're going to go to the bug fix sections, and I'm going to read a paragraph, and you guys have to stay chill. The first paragraph they wrote in bug fixes. We've been following the PhD thesis, literature reviews, and IRB submissions on wave theory and hashtag LowRollGate. And after a deep investigation, we've corrected 2 bugs impacting the number of champions in pools and thus their appearance rates in shops. And that should leave shops feeling much better. With these bugs found, we'll continue to investigate other systems in case they're impacting champion pools too. Now, here's the thing. Does this mean wave theory is real? Hold on. The 2 instances, one of them I think was actually commonly known, but not so commonly known. It was Pandora's Bench. Pandora's Bench, someone would submit a clip where people would roll against a Pandora's Bench opponent, and they would not hit any 5 costs, right? So they would see the 5. They would like, how did I roll on level 10 or level 9? I see no 5 costs. When someone else had like all the 3 costs, 5 costs out of the pool or something like that. It's because they were Pandora's benching all those 5 costs. And they would actually, Pandora's Bench was actively removing units from the pool under specific circumstances. So that's one. The second one was any recombobulation effects, like pocket recombob and recombobulated augments. This one completely surprised me. So what would happen would be if you pocket recombobbed a 1 cost to a 2 cost, and then you recombob the 2 cost to a 3 cost in some specific circumstances, that would also remove the units out of the pool. And so in some rare scenarios, when you're like rerolling for a unit, let's say someone pocket recombobbed into a Kaisa 2 and they recombob that into something else, and you're like, I don't get it, how I just rolled and I didn't find Kaisa. That might be the instances you're talking about, because those units might actually be removed. Again, that's all I'm getting from this patch notes, but it's entirely possible that that was going on. Maybe there's more happening as well. Either way, I think that this paragraph is illuminating some issues and theories that players have had for a while, that something has to be messing with the champion pools this set, because it has not felt good for a while. And then, of course, we have to ask the question, what else do we not know? Was low roll gate real? Is wave theory real? Are their shop odds bugged? Was there something affecting the pools? And the answer is maybe. And you know what? I appreciate that Riot is actually, saying it. They could have actually just updated it and not said anything. So I do want to applaud that. But I also do think that it's kind of funny because, you know, they said a few times that they investigated and found nothing. And now they found something. And that something could also mean that more things are happening. So this is definitely not going to help the conspiracy theory crowd. Also, I have to say, don't go after Mort Dog. He said that he didn't find anything himself personally when he searched, because Mort was saying that he didn't find anything. It's hard to find these effects, right? Like, who's looking to look at exactly like the Pocket Recon Bob under those specific scenarios? But my God, the conspiracy theory, the conspiracy theorists in TFT are not going anywhere anytime soon. The wave theory may be real, guys. Fix the bug that caused power movers to not properly work combining their stacks. That's my favorite part of the patch notes. Oh my God. This was by far the worst experience of the set. Every time you use a power up on a champion, you have to use it twice, sometimes even more. And that just slows down your turn. Imagine you're doing a 20-second turn and you're trying to fish. You have 4 fruits. You have to use it 8 to 10 times. And sometimes it wouldn't even, and then that didn't even give you time to read and react. It was so silly. So that was a huge bug fix. That's been the least favorite part of my set by a mile. So we'll see. Ultra Stance no longer loses his traits when Lee Sin would die in combat. That is also a bug with like the traits on Lee Sin. That's a big one. Ultra Stance no longer sometimes persists his traits when Lee Sin's returned to the unit pool. Exactly. Sometimes I played Lee Sin and he was simultaneously a Juggernaut and a Duelist. Monster trainers correctly update their health at planning phases start instead of only when moved or at combat start. That is a known bug. Please move your monster trainers so that they get their proper HP. 9,000 volts cannon has proper 4-star scaling for his passive damage. Okay, that's good. And then last but not least, bug fixes mana granted from the augment incoming properly mana banks. Okay, fix a bug where some units with extended mana locks could benefit from mana regen during the mana lock. I didn't even know that was a thing. Story of 7 has been removed from Double Up. Didn't even realize that was a bug. I thought Stories of 7 was intended to be in that. Crown of Demacia now tracks its champion role instead of position for determining the bonus to give. That's good. Crown of Demacia, you don't want the wrong thing. Fix the bug where Crystal Gambit cannot double down Talker's Trials. Ziggs cannot now properly triggers on effects like Wit's End. I didn't realize that. Radiant Lucky Item Chest now gives an item if the armory times out. This was a really big bug. If you got the Radiant Lucky Item Chest and the army times out, it just deleted your item. You didn't get anything. Icebender now properly chills for 20% instead of 30%. That is also a big deal as well. Icebender is dealing more damage or doing more than intentional. So Icebender, so they're nerfing Rise. They're nerfing Icebender in multiple ways, right? They're nerfing Socialite, so that definitely impacts that comp a lot. Fix an issue where Shadow Clone's version of Monster Trainer would be counted as the strongest over the real copy. Fix a rounding error where in 100 push-ups that cause the first 6 rolls to not count probably through the total. Okay, and then Suspicious Trenchcoat now probably works with Zach's perfect form. Cool. So that my final slide that I have is what does this mean? What does this mean? This is my interpretation. This is my prediction. My previous prediction, I think I got like a lot of them right. I think my initial predictions last time was like, Mundo got nerfed, Karma got nerfed. I said Caitlyn got nerfed really hard, so she was probably not going to be a thing. But she ended up being a thing, so it was fine. The over 9,000 got nerfed really hard, but it wasn't a thing. Unstoppable did get nerfed, but it still was a thing, right? So you kind of traded off. I said the biggest winners were Rise, Senna Mech, which is sort of true, not really, and Star Guardians. Likely not a big deal. Yumi and Syndra nerfs, kind of right, kind of wrong. So here's my initial impression. It's a huge patch. It's really hard to tell, but here's some guesses. The first is that I think that Prodigy Yumi is probably going to struggle the most. These are some of the biggest losers because they got nerfed across the board. That doesn't mean that they won't be unplayable. They will be unplayable, but maybe they're going to be played a lot less. I think Kraken's Fury got a massive nerf, and I'm not entirely sure what this does to like Ashe, for example. Ashe might be like really, really hard to play now because Kraken's Fury was like her most important item by far, much more than Rageblade. So it might feel like Yumi and Ashe are going to be really hard to like. They're going to struggle a lot more, and it'll be the rise of other things. Artifacts like Innervating, Locking, and Fishbones also got like a pretty big nerf, but it still might be playable, especially Fishbones, because that's not what's really important. It's about the range. And the Luchador rework actually does impact a lot of things. So that's where I'm not sure. Like, I think losing the invulnerability and the untargetability is like a really big deal. The biggest winners, I think Quicksilver and Blue Buff reworks are really big, and I'm going to slam those items like even more often. I think Quicksilver in particular should be a much better item. I think Crystal Gambit were already pretty decent, so this definitely makes them like strong. Twisted Fate endgames, I think Fast 9 should be pretty good. And also, they didn't really nerf Varus Fast 9 very much, so Varus Fast 9 should still be insane. They did give a big buff to Samira, and that's the only 4 costs that they straight buffed. So I think that should help a lot. But if it's not, then I guess I'm wrong. And the Mundo Hero Augment. Things that I'm not sure about. I'm not really sure about the Star Guardian restructure and the Poppy changes. That's like such a big change, how they did everything. So I have no clue. I have no clue how good some of these new power reroll lines are. My guess is that the Mentor ones might be good, but I have no clue. It's just really hard to say. And maybe the Lux one, but I'm not sure because I think Lux actually might be okay. And the Wraith buffs, who knows, man? Who knows? But these are basically my impressions of it. I would say that overall, this patch is so huge, and each patch has been like massive in content. So props to the TFT team. But holy cow, it is going to be crazy. And you know what's even crazier is that this patch releases on Wednesday, and then on Friday we play the Tactician's Cup, which is just crazy. There's a day and a half to learn this new patch for the Tactician's Cup. And tomorrow I'm going to be traveling to Los Angeles, and I'm not going to even have time to play the patch because I have to do some playtest stuff. So this weekend's going to be really, really interesting for the tournament. We're going to see.